Hi, this is Craig Stocks, and this is my photo critique of the day. Today's photo was provided by Scott Meekum. So Scott, thank you so much for providing the photo for us to look at today. And something different from the landscapes, which is what we have seen a lot of. We've got a wonderful photo of a gal with a couple old motorcycles in kind of a grungy looking bar. And the scene overall, I feel, is very homogeneous. I mean, it makes sense to see these old motorcycles inside of the kind of grungy bar. I like the background, the way the license plates are on the trusses up in the ceiling, the signs on the bar, the corrugated metal on the bar, and then all of that as a backdrop for these two old motorcycles, which it looks like somebody has spent some loving time on. Putting these together as choppers, but keeping that old feel to them. And the model's got a nice pose here. We can see the legs and the arms in a nice orientation. So overall, I think you've got the makings of a good image here and a good scene. A couple thoughts on first of all, let's talk about the model's pose. That I like the fact that she has her leg up here so that we see a nice line from her forward leg. Back out. Nice line from her forward leg and down, and then the other leg up so we can clearly see both legs. They're not hidden one behind the other. And again, the arm positions add some interest and some motion to the pose. She looks nice and relaxed and comfortable. I kind of wish, let's talk about her left hand first. Her left hand is just flat against her hip. Ideally, I would like to have seen her maybe hook her thumb in the belt loop or in her pocket so that she could turn her hand so that it's the edge of the hand facing the camera and not the back of the hand. And that would also give her the opportunity to flex her wrist a little bit so that we could have a little bit of a curve in her wrist and see the curve of the side of the hand rather than the flat of the back of the hand. When we have backs of hands flat to the camera, it just creates a large bright spot that frequently the back of the hand winds up being as big as her face and competes for attention. And she does have more of the side of the hand, but we still have a little bit of claw fingers here. If she could have relaxed her right hand a little bit and maybe moved this hand around more to the back of her head, so again we would see more of the side of the hand and less of the back of the hand. Other than that, I think she's got a great pose, good expression looking at the camera. The lighting overall, in a scene like this, it can be a difficult scene to deal with the lighting. And Scott did tell me in terms of the backstory that this is a picture he took after taking my lighting class. So he was experimenting with lighting, and I think he's done a good job here. The main light is coming from the right, so you can see that from the shadow cast by this front wheel on this bike. And also if you look at the model, you can see that her face is being lit from the right side in what's called a broad light lighting pattern. There's not many shadows on her, so I would say don't be afraid of shadows. Shadows is how we define shape and texture, and frequently I like narrow lighting on people's faces, so having the main light on the other side on her face might have been a more attractive light, although her face is certainly one that can stand broad lighting. And of course, one of the challenges when you're photographing people with machines like cars or motorcycles or anything like that, the ideal lighting for a motorcycle is usually very different from the ideal lighting for a person. If we look at the motorcycles, and in particular you can see it on the engines, what makes the motorcycle show up is the reflection of the light source rather than the light source itself. So it's really you're not really lighting metal frequently, but rather you're creating a big light source for the metal to reflect. And you can see, because he had a fairly large light source over here on the right hand side, you can see that being reflected on the engine covers and the transmission cover, or the crankcase cover here, and again on the cylinder head and the cylinders on this engine. And so that really helps the bikes show up well, but it's perhaps less than optimal lighting on the model. The other challenge is foreground and background. Depending on how many strobes or different light sources you have, you can make a choice. Do you want to add light to the background to help it show up, or do you want to let it go real dark? And in this case, we have light falling off, so we have a fairly bright area here in the center where the light was the brightest, and then it falls off as we go closer to the outside scene here. And the same happens with the second motorcycle. As we go further away, it gets darker, and the chairs and the bar in the background go darker. So a couple things that you might play with in terms of evening the lighting out. And I think the way you have it is the right idea, that you want the background to be darker, but how much darker might be something that you could play with. If we just pull up the radial filter here in Lightroom, if I add a radial adjustment around the model, and let me invert it so it's affecting outside the circle rather than inside the circle, we can brighten up the outside a little bit, and that puts a little bit more light into the background without putting more light on her. And in fact, once we have lightened up the background a little bit, we might want to come back and darken the image overall. The other thing that I'm seeing is there's a lot of light fall off because the light is illuminating the floor quite a bit in front of the model. So again, we can pull up a graduated filter adjustment and pull it up from the bottom and darken the foreground, so the floor in the foreground is a little bit better match to the floor in the background, and that really helps the model and the bikes pop out a little bit more against the background. And the last thing I might do in terms of cropping, we have some outside bright sunlight in the background, which is somewhat unavoidable, but if you consider cropping just to this edge of that window, so we don't have that bright area right on the edge, and we might even crop in a little bit on the right hand side. There's a lot of reflecting detail here that could just be cropped out. And of course you could spend a lot of time evening out the light in the background, darkening the reflection here, and just playing with it overall. But that gives you kind of an idea of some things that maybe I would consider playing with. That overall I think you've got a great image here. I like the balance of the bikes, the way they're arranged. I like the way the character of the bikes matches the character of the bar and the character of the background. Good pose by the model. Good lighting overall. There's always things you can do differently, but I think overall you've got a successful image. And I always love to see the work from people who have taken a class. Classes are a good way to start, but it's not until you get out and really practice and work with it that you really begin to make that skill your own. So I'm glad to see you using the skills and techniques that we talked about in the class. So Scott, thanks for providing this image for us today, and everybody have a great day.